Zach with Wingard Wearables. You're a special person because you're one of 12 people that's going to sit through this video to the end. In today's video, it's a fun topic. It's about cheap tomahawks that any of you can just go out and buy online today and modify into much lighter, faster, spicier versions that are closer to the historic weights of battle-proven spiked tomahawks. This story starts back in 2016 when I started researching tomahawks for my own personal carry. And this eventually would lead to the Backripper tomahawk, but it began with this cold steel Trailhawk. At the time, these were $25. When I looked in on Amazon, they were $45. I think you can still get them in some places in the upper 20s with, shipping cost added. But we're going to talk today about the cold steel Trailhawk, the cold steel Vietnam Tomahawk, and then the Track of the Wolf Rifleman's belt axe. I think that's what they call this one. So those were the three that I had fun modifying, and I'm sure some of you who are handy and into doing home projects and stuff will be into that as well. Now, about cold steel tomahawks, there's a small cottage industry of very talented people that have been modifying various wood-handled cold steel tomahawks and just doing amazing things. They'll do power carving. I think there's a big YouTube channel that I'll link to that goes over lessons on power carving, and he does just beautiful work on these cold steel tomahawk handles. I'll show you my really poor skills I had back in 2016. I borrowed a neighbor's wood burner. I think I still have it in my garage. I don't think I've returned it. I broke it. Anyway, and I did this to this cold steel Trailhawk. Check this out. A rattlesnake, and it's segmented into 13 little segments like the 13 colonies. Can you guys see that? Is my wife nodding? Okay. I have an obsession with rattlesnakes, and I'll go into that story at the end of this video, so you want to stick around for that. Remind me, rattlesnake story. Okay. But did that. I also did a skull, because who doesn't like skulls and arrows? And then I wanted like something funny on this, So this was what I thought in German was kiss my axe. It turns out German is a very harsh language. Their translation, the way they say kiss my ass, is way worse. So I didn't put that in there. I didn't want the lick me in the whatevers on there. But anyway, Kusin, my mind out axe was on there. So that was fun, but I needed to get way more serious because this thing was really heavy, and I saw this disconnect where, the historic spiked tomahawks were so much lighter than this. This whole cold steel tomahawk weighs 22 ounces and is about 22 inches long. It is not a historic tomahawk. It is made to look like it. And they have this hideous set screw in there to keep the head somewhat secured to the handle, but this will eventually wear out, and the head will randomly, on some conditions, slide down the handle, which is tapered, and into your hand. So that gets a little spicy. There are lots of tips and stuff online on how to further secure the head, pin it, put epoxy or wraps in it. I didn't go to that trouble because I was just doing research to see, hey, could I modify this into a size and weight that was closer to what they were using back in the day. And this is what I came up with. So if you look at the cold steel Trailhawk originally, this was several hours of work using a Dremel cutoff wheel attachment and a grinding wheel. And so you can see I reduced the chopping axe length. I greatly reduced the chopping edge from, I think this is 2 1/4 inch to this is now 1 1/2 inch. And at the time I was reading Macklemore's Fighting Tomahawk text. He passed away, I think it was in 2020. So I never got to talk to him before he passed away, but his text had a lot about choking up on the Tomahawk, like a fist load, and punching and doing these rakes. Interesting. No historic accounts show any warriors use them that way, but at the time, that was the text I was researching. That was the first Tomahawk combative text I was looking at. So I added these edges on the top and the bottom to do, hooking and the rake and even thrusting, in addition to chopping. I thought that would accentuate the combative capability and potentially the utility, because if you guys remember, there was a lot in the bushcraft community at the time about doing this, taking apart your tomahawk and doing little handy knife-like tasks with a tomahawk head separated from the handle. I was into that idea too back then. I'm not into those anymore, but these are mods that you can do. These are fully hardened steel tomahawk heads, so it was slow going. You have to have a lot of water nearby when you're on the grinding wheel or using the Dremel tool, especially on the corners. You'll start to see the color change as the heat concentrates in the corners, and then you basically ruin your tomahawk head's hardness that way. It's very easy to cook the corners of this. So it is a tedious process, but it was substantially thinner and lighter. This went from 22 ounces total to, this is a 16-inch handle, and this whole thing weighs a little over 12 ounces. And the historic spike tomahawks were almost all of them were under a pound. And 12 ounces I did find through experiments just swinging this at, various surrogate target materials and just going through flourishes and flows. 12 ounces did feel fast. Recovery was a touch sluggish, but it was nowhere near as sluggish as this. So that was a fun mod, and I did go for this aesthetic, like angular look to it. I had people tell me, hey, you could modify this into like a spike, but you can see that the hammer pole only projects a very short distance from the handle, about an inch, under an inch and 3/4. And when you look at the historic spike tomahawks, they were much longer than that. It's rare to see them even at 2 inches of length. They were averaging around 3 inches. Some of them were pushing over 4 inches, and there's reasons for that. And so, if you are serious about modifying a cold steel Trailhawk into something that you would use, potentially as a self-defense weapon, that sort of thing, just know that hammer pole really does neuter the combative capability. When you don't have that spike, that means if you swing and you miss and you have to then recover and swing back, you don't have the spike on the end to instantly transition like you do on these other models. And that spike does need to be 2 inches or over 2 inches to increase the probability of meat hooking and catching on skeletal structures to tear down an opponent, that sort of thing. Little nubbin spikes are just not effective. But anyway, lots of things that you could do. Maybe this inspires folks into doing this, but I greatly thinned down the handle, because the handle on this alone weighed, I think, about 6 ounces or more. So I thinned this down in thickness so it was closer to some historic examples, and I also bumped it out right here, because one of the unsafe things about these taper drop through the top handles is they're tapering down continuously, so you can drop them down through the eye, and you can lose grip with a tapered grip that way. You usually want some sort of flare out, which is what I did here, a little bit of a flare out there. So it was a lot of work. This material here on the handle was removed. I think I used a draw knife and a Dremel tool at the time. My woodworking skills weren't very good. So I think that sums up the Trailhawk, okay? And there are just so many mods people have done on the Trailhawk. You guys can do a real deep dive like on the internet on different modifications people have done. But at the time I did this in 2016, no one had been taking this radical of stock removal for their mods. They were doing things like putting foul work on them, maybe converting it to a little nubbin spike. some of them were doing like laser etching or even doing like a cutout of like a Christian cross on it, that sort of thing. Really fancy, but they weren't trying to radically reduce the weight of the Tomahawk and concentrate the chopping edge. So this was pretty different. And I had fun doing it. I learned a lot with it. Now, here we got this guy. Also made in Taiwan by Cold Steel. So the Vietnam Spike Tomahawk style that Cold Steel makes is, scale here, over 20 ounces. So at the time, it was the lightest Tomahawk that Cold Steel offered. Cold Steel has discontinued this model. I am not sure why. At the same time, RMJ came out with the American Tomahawk Company's offering of this. So I don't know if that was related, because Cold Steel had been using the American Tomahawk Company name for a long time. So it seems like they dropped that and this model around the same time. No idea if those two things are related. So this Tomahawk is not a taper drop to the top. It is wedged, and they also put a metal circular wedge in the middle and put in epoxy and that sort of thing on a hickory handle. The handle is very slippery. The head is very heavy. This is a sluggish and slow Tomahawk, but it is wedged like most spike Tomahawks historically were, and the spike is long enough to be similar to what the historic ones were like. The chopping edge is almost 3 inches. That's quite wide, especially not being lunar. Like really, when they were going wider on their chopping edges, they were usually very curved. So this straight edge, that was the style that Lagana designed it for in Vietnam. And so Cold Steel's version of it is here, and this is my modification. So what I did is I wanted a 16-inch handle. I drilled out the original handle. I went to househandles.com and bought an 18-inch hammer handle. You're about to get a cat on the screen here. Tater Tot is threatening the iPad. Oh boy. Here we go. Is he on the screen? Oh, geez. Awful. We just fed these guys right before this video, too. It's been a long week. These cats aren't helping. All right. So, back to the mods. I bought a hammer handle that was 18 inches and used lots of draw knife work to get this thinned down and to fit the head. So that was the handle mods I did. I did not bother with a proper wooden wedge because this was just for experiments, so I used a metal wedge because it was quick. And the head has a lot of mods. You can see, if we hold them together, I reduced the length of the chopping edge and how far it projects from the handle. I kept the spike the same, but I extended the grind on this sharpened bottom edge, and it is way thinner, just way thinner. And I believe I got this down to a little over 10 ounces, 10.3 ounces. So it's about half the weight of the Cold Steel Vietnam Tomahawk, but it's a couple of inches longer. And at 10 ounces, this thing is crazy quick in the hand. Really represents what a historic spike Tomahawk, how it can move and transition, do wrapping, hook strikes, that sort of thing. I should have gone narrower on the edge, and I was still obsessed with that idea of putting an edge on the top and the bottom. I found through chopping experiments that putting those edges on top and bottom could lead to binding the chopping blade in certain materials. It was sort of like wedging not just the chopping edge into material, but also the tops and bottoms, so it was harder to lever it out. So I would not do that if I were to redo this mod. Also, I would recommend blunting this tip. I kept it like Tanto tip sharp. It is crazy sharp. And you have that pointed at you. And in a combative situation, someone could push that into your body, or in a bushcraft situation, you basically have a super pointy knife facing you at all times. A lot of the historic Tomahawks were curved or had blunted tips, so I would recommend blunting that. It's really not necessary to have that sharp of a Tomahawk spike when you're just doing gross motor movements to push in or whip it back into somebody. But that's the Vietnam Tomahawk mod. It's unfortunate that Cold Steel discontinued this model. This model at the time I bought it was about $40. Now to get a new Vietnam Spike Tomahawk model, you'd have to buy it from American Tomahawk Company, and those are $190. And they are even heavier than this. Quality tool, quality product. They look very good, but they're nowhere as fast as this. And it seems, outside of the scope to spend almost $200 on something that you're going to be, doing radical modifications to. But you may be able to pick these up on eBay or some other sites for cheap, used ones, that sort of thing. Now, the last Tomahawk to mod is the best, in my opinion, mod project you can do. So this is from trackofthewolf.com. They sell a lot of reenactor stuff, but some of the gear is functional. Most of the gear is functional. And this I found, I believe they called it a Rifleman's belt axe. They do sell the drop to the top handle reproductions of Tomahawk heads, but this was the only spike Tomahawk offering they had. And it comes in a kit like this. So this head is cast 4140 steel. They claim they cast this in the USA. They did not tell me where they cast it, so we'll just assume that what they're saying is true. It's cast. It is not heat treated, and that's actually fine given how thick that chopping edge is, okay, and how thick the spike is. Even though this is fairly soft steel, if you put an edge on this, due to the thickness of it as a wedge, if you're chopping into flesh and bone or wood, it will hold up. But this put all together weighs, isn't this the exciting part of the video? 13 ounces. So it's under a pound, but it's on the high end of Tomahawk weights. And so when I got this, I wanted to go even lighter. I saw these historic spike Tomahawks that were weighing, under 10 ounces. I couldn't get this Cold Steel Vietnam Tomahawk any lighter than what I took it to. So I wanted to go lighter, and this is the one I chose. Today they sell these for $40, the whole kit. But I think it's worth doing because the head is not heat treated. You can more easily remove the material off of this and not worry about ruining the heat treat. The problem is if you're actually going to use this as a bushcraft item or a self-defense item, you got to figure out how you're going to heat treat this properly afterwards. So that's the tricky bit. I did not bother heat treating mine. This was my mod. I didn't even bother cutting off the top of the wood and the wedge here. This head isn't terribly secure on there, but look at that. Big reduction in chopping edge length. I was still obsessed with that idea of the top and bottom edge. I sharpened the edge of the spike here, and this guy weighs 8.2 ounces. And when I got this made and I was swinging it, man, this thing can move. And that's what I knew, our Backripper Tomahawk had to move as fast as this and be more capable. Now, because the spike is downturned like a lot of the historic spike Tomahawks, it does reduce the risk of self-injury. But this is not ergonomic to carry. This is over 6 inches of straight length, and wearing this inside the waistband, there's going to be a lot of protrusions, that sort of thing. I guess it's possible you might be able to rig up a shoulder harness for it. But I did not bother finishing the handle. Once I got this mod to this point, which took many hours, I did some test chops on meat wrapped coconut on using all these, and I hadn't bothered heat treating it because I wasn't really serious about carrying this. It breached the coconut with arm motion alone, but that did ding up the edge here and here because it's not heat treated. And also, a coconut is way, way harder and tougher than a human head. Coconuts really aren't good Tomahawk surrogate targets. But those were the mods I did. I think they were pretty interesting learning experiences. I bet far more talented people could turn these into really nicely, finely crafted items. But my recommendation, if you're going to go out and get a cheap Tomahawk to do spicy mods to make it, move like a historic spike Tomahawk, look into getting a Track of the Wolf Rifleman's belt axe. $40. I mean, really, at 13 ounces, that's still way, way lighter than the cold steel offerings, and the spike is downturned. It is not, none of these come sharp at all. This or the other cold steel ones are as dull as a butter knife. I mean, they have to save costs somewhere. Cold Steel did that by making them in Taiwan. Track of the Wolf did that by going to a cast head. And people will object to cast heads and claim, they're weaker, that sort of thing. If something's badly done, it's badly done. There are definitely bad cast parts out there, just as there are bad hand-forged or even, hammer-forged, drop-forged parts. A properly cast Tomahawk head, if it's done with a modern casting equipment to avoid voids and that sort of thing, is going to be fine. Our Empress Tomahawks are cast. It's high-strength silicon bronze. That's actually softer than cast 4140 steel, and these hold up great on flesh and bone. So if you hear, this is a cast head that makes it weak, no, it's weak because it wasn't heat treated yet. The problem isn't that it was cast. It's just they didn't want to pay for getting it heat treated afterwards because they're trying to save money, especially if they are actually making these in America for $40. I don't know how they do that and turn a profit. That's incredible. So anyway, have fun with your mods, especially if you're curious about how fast these guys move. Just know that the mods I did, all the time I put into them, at the end of the day, they weren't ergonomic to carry. They didn't come with carry systems, and they were actually heavier than these guys. These two weigh just over 7 ounces. So anyway, I was supposed to tell a story. Rattlesnake. Pat the rattlesnake. So I'd always been obsessed with reptiles as a kid. And I grew up to be an adult in Alabama, a young adult, a foolish adult. This is the dumbest thing I've ever done, purposely. We all do dumb things without thinking. I do not know a human who has put more thought into a stupid thing than what I'm about to tell you. I researched and bought a timber rattlesnake as a pet. How dumb is that? Man, that was dumb. I bought it from this guy in Tennessee. This is probably illegal because I crossed state lines and bought a rattlesnake, which is a wild animal. I mean, he bred them in captivity, but somewhere they were wild at some point. But it was a black-faced timber rattler. It was a newborn. Well, rattlesnakes are live birth. They aren't hatched from eggs. And it was really awesome looking, even though it was a baby, only that long with a little button rattle. It just looked wicked, Black-faced timber rattler is just incredible. But it was a newborn, and in reality, in nature, most of these newborns don't make it the first year. And Pat was so dumb he wouldn't eat. So there was this pet store in outside of Huntsville, Alabama, where I was living at the time. It was way out of my way, but it was the only pet store that sold pinkies, newborn mice, okay? This pet store was so sketchy they had a rattlesnake in the pet store, okay, a live rattlesnake. And the only point of having a rattlesnake as a pet is a cool-looking thing that you watch during eating time when you throw a mouse in there, right? So I got Pat. I named the rattlesnake Pat because in order to gender a rattlesnake, you have to hold it and probe it. I wasn't going to do that. My plan was to have a pet rattlesnake that I never touched or handled. I had all the tongs and stuff. Oh, I was so smart figuring this out. But Pat wouldn't eat anything. So I would, drive out of my way to this pet store, pick up the Pinky, poor little newborn mouse, drive back, drop the Pinky into the the terrarium with Pat. And Pat would just watch this thing starve to death for like days and wouldn't eat it. And Pat was slowly starving to death, right? And so I was picking up Pinkies every few days from this pet store. I had to call ahead of time because the guy said you always call because, we got to make sure Pinkies are in stock. And I was like, are Pinkies like some hot selling item here? And he's like, no, the newborn Pinkies get eaten by the mothers all the time. And I was like, wow, that's just screwed up. So I felt a little bad that I was, in the Pinky mouse trade economy. It's just a really sad story. These little Pinky mice getting born to be eaten. And sometimes they get eaten by their own mothers. Isn't that screwed up? Anyway, the story gets more screwed up. So Pat wouldn't eat. I brought Pat to the pet store. This was pre-Obamacare. It's important. This was a time when some people didn't have health insurance. And so I bring Pat in to the pet store. And the guy says, yeah, you have to force feed him or he's going to starve to death. Whatever gender Pat is. Okay? I just called him he. And I said, I am not comfortable doing that. Right? Because even though it was stupid owning a rattlesnake, I knew force-feeding a rattlesnake was super stupid, right? And the pet store owner offered to force-feed Pat, but said, I would want to keep Pat if I'm doing that because I don't have health insurance. So he's communicating to me that he's going to engage in force-feeding a rattlesnake. There is more risk on his part, not only because he's going to get bit by the rattlesnake probably, but he doesn't have health insurance. Icing on the cake. So I said, keep Pat. I walked out of that pet store, never went back. I don't want to go back because I'll feel bad. Like if I go there and he's like missing an arm or something because my rattlesnake I bought bit him. Anyway, don't own rattlesnakes as pets. Everyone on Earth knows that, but occasionally some of us can't resist temptation and do it. I think that's about it. It's long enough, isn't it? How long is it? 30 minutes? Almost 28 minutes? You're one of the 12. You stuck through it. Share this video so 13 will have watched it. And be edgy.